This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Grateful to have you here with us on this episode of Real Talk. Supriya Dwivedi in just a moment. Our feature guest, of course, basically co-host, let's be real. The first episode of every week presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West, and a ton to get to. Iran's new leadership in place without the blessing, of course, of the United States. The Ayatollah's son will take over. What does this mean? Here at home on Canadian soil, Mark Carney shifting his stance on American and Israeli attacks in Iran. We'll get Supriya's take on that. And even closer to home, our friends, Real Talkers that are checking out this show from Southern Alberta, Calgary in particular, a bit of a change of pace, a bit of a different reality as that city is back on water restrictions, major infrastructure improvements in Calgary over the next number of months, and a warning for municipalities across the country that are staring down crumbling infrastructure. We've got you covered. Coming up in about a half an hour's time, we're going to check in with the senior researcher at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. If you happen to check out our special episode, our most recent show, featuring Dr. Shazma Mathani and Jenny Adams, leading up to International Women's Day, a comment or a series of comments had popped up in our live chat, powered by Park Power, people talking about the worst cities or the worst regions in Canada to live in if you're a woman. Now, on the fly, live during that episode, we found the stats we could, but as you know, if you heard it, they were about 12 years old. And so we reached out to the group behind that research, asked them if they have an update, and they do. So we'll get to that in follow-up coming up on the back nine of this show. As we get the ball rolling, we want to remind you that this episode is presented by our friends at Hanson Distillery, and they have just and very proudly released a brand new offering. This is their mini Yeggs. I've got the bottle on the table here with me, and of course, as you can see, Johnny showing you my screen right now, we were proud to taste test that Hanson Distillery mini Yeggs cream liqueur in our most recent episode. You can check out the taste test under the highlights on our YouTube channel, or you can just get yourself onto hansondistillery.com, take our word for it, and pick up a bottle for yourself. This is a limited release. They're just doing 2,000 bottles of this, so I can basically guarantee you that this is going to sell out fast, and for good reason. Whether you're enjoying this over ice, maybe in your coffee, or like some of you wild animals are telling us about already, poured over ice cream, mini Yeggs cream liqueur is bound to impress. A moment of pure nostalgia with this velvety cream liqueur from this incredible family-run distillery in Edmonton. And although I think they could have priced it higher, to be quite honest with you, they do have it right now on offer at just $32 a bottle. Now, we're hearing from a bunch of you that have ordered this online. More of you are popping into Hanson Distillery on 174th Street, 111th Avenue in the Metro Edmonton region. Don't forget, you can also keep an eye out for it wherever fine Alberta spirits are sold. Hanson Distillery is made right here. Supriya Dwivedi, our guest, first episode of every week, presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. And I know it's maybe a little bit cliche to bitch about this right out of the gates, my friend, but it is like 24 or so hours after a time change. They're not doing it anymore in BC. This was their last one. Ontario, Alberta for now, sticking to their guns. Does it actually impact or affect you? How are you feeling on this Monday morning?
I mean, we can share this with the audience, but I texted you yesterday, and I think I said something along the lines of "fuck springing forward."
You did. That was actually your exact words.
Yeah, I hate it. Like, you know, whenever you were falling back, it's like, okay, fine, we get an extra hour. And look, I certainly appreciate the sunshine. Don't get me wrong. You know, yesterday it was nice to, you know, even after me and my kid had dinner, there was still sunshine outside. I'm not opposed to the sun. I'm not trying to channel my inner Mr. Burns here, but we have to do something about this because I hate it. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel for this show's technical director, to be honest with you. This guy works hard during the week, keeping this train on the tracks, and then on weekends, oftentimes he's there in the clubs, spinning tunes as Alberta's most recognized DJ. And I was curious to know how you would manage on this Monday morning as well. The time change after working till last call on a Saturday into Sunday morning has got to be a bit of a kick in the teeth.
Yeah, get out of here, Supriya. No, I'm just kidding. I told you before, it doesn't really affect me other than it's fun to watch that clock turn from 1:59 to 3.
It's very exciting.
It's like, oh my God, we're at the time warp. We're in an alternate reality. But I do agree that we were talking about this. When it goes back, you kind of need it here in Alberta because otherwise we're in like this weird dark and light. It's strange.
So Supriya, this is what a premier here is saying, and I'm sure you've seen it, that as David Eby and BC makes the move, they're getting off the time change, and so, as they are now they shall stay, along with Saskatchewan. Danielle Smith's going, well, maybe Alberta should too, right? We're bookended by these two provinces that won't be shifting. But, like, the reality is, living geographically north like we do in Edmonton, people that actually look at the map and see how far north we are, if you don't fall back, you're going to get sunrises at, like, 10 in the morning in December.
Which is
and I think
so
that's
depressing.
Right?
Like, think about how depressing that would be. You guys doing the show, you're coming in, and it's light getting out just as you're, like, towards the end of your show. Like, I don't know. I can't. So I get that it's, like, a necessary thing that we have to do, changing the clocks, but it doesn't mean I can't complain about it.
No, we can all
every
complain
single
about
time.
it. And
sorry, Johnny.
he's just
I'm
positive,
just grumpy. I lost an hour.
He's
So I'm grumpy today.
See, it does impact you.
It's
He's just realizing it actually does affect us. It's been obviously a huge week in the news cycle, and since we last spoke, and so we'll jump right into it. There's about 1 million angles on Iran, and obviously oil prices are surging. You've got new leadership installed, which will not pass Donald Trump's muster test, and I think that is relevant. And then obviously ramifications here in Canada as well, including for Prime Minister Mark Carney and for millions of Canadians that are kind of wondering where Canada stands on all of this. Donald Trump calling out the UK over the weekend. I'm sure that most people have seen that post where he basically tells Starmer to leave his aircraft carriers at home. The United States will remember this, he says. We're not interested in people looking to join wars that we've already won. Where do you start with this one?
Yeah, great question. I don't know where to start, so let's just dive in. Let's go with the new leadership being installed. Last week when you and I had spoken about this, I think what I had sort of honed in on is the entire premise of like, well, what next? So, this war has been started and there wasn't really a clear answer as to what was next or who was going to fill that leadership vacuum. And now we have the answer. It's his son, the Ayatollah's son, who's going to take over. Relatively younger guy at 56, I believe, considered to be even more of a hardliner than his dad was. I think it's worth pointing out as well that in the strike that took out his dad, it also took out his wife. So you can imagine he's probably pretty angry about that. And just if the entire, premise or goal, objective, whatever, of these strikes was, to install better leadership in Iran, that certainly doesn't seem to be the case here. And then, shifting gears on the Canadian side of things, as you noted, the Prime Minister had initially come out, quite supportive of the war. He has since sort of walked that back. And I think right now there's going to be quite a few eyeballs on the next caucus meeting, which should be this week, this Wednesday. Last Friday, I believe it was, the Foreign Affairs Minister had to have a briefing call with members of the Liberal caucus to sort of explain or justify the Canadian position, because there are a ton of Liberal MPs right now that are, quite disappointed with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister for having taken the position on Iran that they did. Yeah,
we spent some time last week. I think there's some obvious parallels, and there would obviously be some holes that you could poke in the comparison as well. But 2003, Canada, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien telling the Americans that we would not enter Iraq without, basically the UN Security Council giving the green light. And it's a decision that I think not only aged well for Chrétien and for Canada, but also one that, as we heard from some experts last week on the show, some commentators saying that almost became part of the Liberal Party's identity, or that was something that the Liberal Party had actually felt somewhat proud about, or felt like the decision had justified itself, despite being criticized at the time by Brian Mulroney and many others that said that Canada was making a mistake, that Canada was abandoning its most important ally, and the like. Is there almost like an identity thing to this? Is Iraq 23 years ago front of mind with these Liberal MPs holding this meeting, sharing these concerns?
I mean, I don't know if Iraq is necessarily front of mind for the vast majority of MPs, but I would say, and I think I mentioned this last week on the show, so apologies for, repeating myself, but if you're of a certain age, you basically came of age, in opposition to the Iraq war, right? Like if you're 40-ish, between I would say 35 to 45 years old, you probably, remember that quite well. And it probably shaped a lot of your own politics at a young age. So I think there are certainly parallels that can be drawn. I think, whomever said that it became part of the Liberal Party's identity is quite right about that. And I think, moving forward, for caucus to sort of have their concerns quelled on this front, I think you're going to have to see, or you're going to see rather, clearer or sharper language from the Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister Anand, because this just seems untenable to have that many MPs that are, kind of pissed at you, which, in fairness, is kind of like a bit of a mindfuck, considering that the Liberals are like rolling away on like every single polling metric there is. And we can get into that a little bit later. But, if the polls are as far ahead for the Liberals as they are, I can imagine that the Prime Minister and those around him wouldn't be too concerned with a few disgruntled MPs. But of course, if you've got a critical mass of MPs that are basically calling out your own position, like that is somewhat untenable moving forward.
And, not to sound cynical, but I think this is a fact as well, considering these 3 by-elections now announced coming up mid-April, April 19th, right? The polling's going to matter more than ever. And a lot of when it comes to, the Prime Minister's, I don't know if you say posturing, but strategy on what he's going to say about Iran or Canada's position on Iran, all things considered, that will factor in. This isn't all about whether or not Canadian troops could be on the ground in Iran, right? There's more to it.
Yeah, totally. And, that is a good point. And you did point this out earlier that like we haven't had a concrete sort of ask, right? So it's compared to the Iraq situation, we're not being asked to have boots on the ground in an offensive situation in Iran. What the Prime Minister has maintained is that when it comes to defending our allies, we'll step up. And so that applies in the context of NATO. Like if Turkey is, let's say, hit and they want to invoke Article 5, then all the NATO countries, I guess, sort of would have to have some sense of consensus and then move forward. But then the other aspect is, we just came off signing a bunch of deals with a bunch of Gulf states, right, over the last little bit, thanks to Prime Minister Mark Carney. And if one of those Gulf countries is like, we could use some of Canada's help in terms of, naval backup or what have you, I'm pretty sure we'd have to say yes to that. So it's not a definitive thing that we're being asked, but it's certainly plausible if you're gaming this out. So in all of this, that's going to have to be part of the calculus for those 3 Liberal by-elections that are going to be called on April 13th, as you noted. And like, again, if the Liberals make away with all 3 seats, they've got a majority here. And Mark Carney has done basically what would have been considered impossible, or at least highly improbable, just about a year ago.
I by the way, said April 19th off the top of my head.
I was trying to correct you.
No notes.
Calling it out.
But this audience is smart enough to know that you subtly and graciously corrected me, but we'll just let them know that now, the next time I'm in Toronto, the next time you're in Edmonton, I will obviously be buying you lunch. So thank you for that. So April 13th for the by-elections. I'll remind people that you were a senior advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You've worked in the PMO. You've seen how all of this kind of plays out. It's like a really interesting. This isn't Russia in Ukraine, right? Because the situation here is that essentially everybody, or most nations for sure, and any of the nations that Canada would be particularly concerned about, would acknowledge that Iranian leadership has been a huge problem, that, Iran has been a debacle, that it represents a major threat to global security, that there has been some acknowledgement and awareness, not just from the White House, that a nuclear program was a concern, maybe not 2 weeks out from having the bomb, but still an issue. So it's not the fact necessarily that the United States and Israel are in Iran or are bombing Iran. It's the circumstances around it, right? And that could be developing. Like, I'll quote a Liberal MP out of Victoria. This is Will Greaves a while ago, says Canada cannot endorse the unilateral and illegal use of military force, the killing of civilians, that's a huge one, the girls' school in particular, or the kidnapping and assassination of foreign heads of government, while also insisting that our sovereignty, our fights, and our independence must be protected. It's not necessarily that they're there. It's how they're there, or under which justification, or maybe the fact that there doesn't appear to be a real plan after the bombs stop flying.
Yeah, I think that's all part of it. And, to your point about the ability to acquire a nuclear weapon, I mean, it's certainly true that they've been, Iran has been enriching uranium for the last little bit, but there's nothing to suggest that they were imminently on the cusp of being able to develop a nuclear weapon. And, there's some reporting out there to suggest that Iran was actually making some headway with respect to negotiations that were being led by Oman to sort of get them off of the enrichment track that they've been on. And then we had those U.S.-Israeli strikes that kind of, off-kiltered whatever progress that was being made. So, I mean, all of that is taken into, is factored in and taken into consideration. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Once you have these bombs that are flying and you have a bunch of dead little girls from hitting a girls' elementary school and a bunch of dead civilians piling up, public opinion is going to be on the side of the dead schoolgirls and the dead civilians. Like, I'm not saying anything that's like super groundbreaking here, but public opinion will be on that side. That's just Canadian public opinion anyway. So any politician that is seen to be giving, cover, I guess, to the U.S.-Israeli offensive in Iran, even if you're super anti the regime, right? You have to question what the end game is here and how things are going to look once the pullout sort of begins. And again, what gets left in that power vacuum. And as of right now, just like it was with Venezuela, the baddies are still in charge.
Over the weekend, the president, Donald Trump, says that Iran was at fault, by the way, for that strike on that girls' school. And I mean, reporting widely suggests, including, I'll reference CBSnews.com right now for this, reporting by Margaret Brennan, Olivia Gassis, and Camila Schick, that the U.S. May be responsible for that attack that killed 168 people, many of them children, on February 28th. I don't know about you, but I've been seeing a ton of criticism on, aimed at mainstream media for really kind of giving the United States a pass on this one, for not, I guess, sort of, condemning such an attack, in particular commentators, as much as might be expected. What's your take on that one in particular?
Yeah, I think corporate media, for the most part, and I don't want to lump everyone into the same bunch, but I think they're likely a little bit more hardened by this, right? Like, I don't know that if in reporting numbers that pertain to dead civilians, particularly that aren't dead civilians that look like quote unquote typical American, and I'll put that in air quotes or whatever, just doesn't get the same level of sympathy from corporate media, particularly American corporate media, and they should be right to be called out, because again, if the U.S. was responsible for killing a bunch of little girls, that's not anything to be proud about. Particularly when you're supposed to be the mightiest army with the most advanced AI that can target with precision these targets from, what I mean? Like, it's like, well, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I was just watching the news last night, and I don't know if you saw, there was it a Marriott, I think, in Beirut, where they claim that 4 Iranian military officials were hiding out or at least meeting, and the precise nature of that attack was nuts. If you consider that is like a civilian center, it's like Beirut is a major urban center, and the Marriott Hotel, and there's a corner suite that was just eviscerated, basically. The rest of the hotel standing, not to suggest there may not have been other injuries and the like, but obviously, like, it feels almost so obvious that I don't want to say it because it just feels like everybody would acknowledge this, but like, I don't know, schools should be off the table. And it just sort of feels like this is one of those things where it feels like either cost of war, maybe how some people see it, and others attempting to shift blame, but it just seems like a wild place to start. I mean, we're basically a week and a bit into this thing, and now people are saying, well, this would be a matter of weeks. Others saying this could be a matter of months. Others are saying this could go on forever. I thought a bit of a shocking statement, although not surprising, and those two things can be different. Not surprising, but still shocking. Jared Agan, the executive director of the National Energy Dominance Council, this White House committee, talking about what may happen in the months and years to come in Iran and how the United States stands to benefit. Check this out.
This is a long-term gain because what we want to do is get such massive oil reserves in Iran out of the hands of terrorists. And so what we're going to experience here in the short term is highly outweighed of the long-term benefit, because ultimately we're not going to have to worry about these issues in the Strait of Hormuz because we're going to get all of the oil out of the hands of terrorists.
We're going to get all the oil. There you have it, plainly stated. Surprising nobody, I don't think. But if you bring this back to what Mark Carney has to present, not just to his caucus, but to Canadians, I mean, does that change the conversation?
It should. And this is why it was always a little bit silly for the prime minister not necessarily to back the U.S. I think I said this last week, but I don't think anyone really expected the prime minister or the Canadian government to go out of their way to like clock Trump in the face unnecessarily, right? Or to put out a kind of antagonistic or adversarial statement with regards to the U.S. and these strikes. But I think that some of the language in that first original statement that the prime minister had put out, you know, talking about the nuclear regime and Iran being the cause, or like the sole cause of the instability in the Middle East, probably rubbed people the wrong way. And again, like, this was always foreseeable that Trump wasn't going to have any sort of long-term plan. Because if nothing else, just look at the way Venezuela went down, right? Like, he was already very early into the capture of Maduro, being like, okay, well, on to the next. Like, what else is out there? And again, unprompted, late last week in interviews with a bunch of journalists, Trump apparently was, again, just putting out there, well, Cuba's next and Cuba better watch out. So it seems like, again, he's already on to the next without having a clear exit strategy or even clear identify objectives that he was aiming for in Iran. And now the Carney government has to kind of wriggle its way out of the initial support, which, to be fair, I think to some degree they've already been able to do rather successfully. But of course, they need to convince those disgruntled caucus members that Carney's going to have to listen to on Wednesday whenever he sees caucus this week.
Kinnaret's watching us live streaming on Facebook as part of our live stream presented by California Closets. She wonders, why do you have to wait until Iran is on the cusp of being nuclear to act? She says, isn't that kind of suicidal? She says Iran doesn't negotiate. Iran stalls. And she says, and by the way, maybe Iran shouldn't have put a base next to a school. She says it's a terrible tragedy, but the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps kills women all the time. Yeah. That from Kinneret.
But we do that in North America too. Like the States,
bases next to schools
all the time.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say, like we just said with the Marriott in Beirut. I don't believe that you can't, that being off by 500 meters on a missile strike is acceptable under any circumstance. But the point there, why do you have to wait until Iran's on the cusp of being nuclear? It's been interesting hearing from, Minister Anand in Canada, the Prime Minister himself and others have said, listen, Canada's been attempting diplomatic measures here. Canada's been attempting to negotiate here. And not just Canada, obviously, but for quite some time, like for years. And I don't know, I guess at one point, do you have to ask, aside from maybe some economic implications that you look at, oil reserves, things like that, you also have to look at what the public will tolerate too, right? Like if the Americans, has the White House kind of put its finger on the pulse here and determined that Trump's going to be okay support-wise by going ahead with this?
I mean, I don't think he will be. That's the thing. Like, if you look at initial support for this war, we've been talking about Iraq and the comparisons there. Iraq didn't start off as like super, super duper unpopular. It became unpopular.
It was very popular at the begining.
Yeah.
It was the opposite.
Exactly. The strikes on Iran started off as unpopular. So it'll be interesting to see, I guess, if there is eventually some sort of flip in the popular unpopularity kind of metric here. But I don't think so. Like, I think as oil prices start to surge, and I think as people increasingly get through their social media, if not through like regular reporting, images and news of civilians being severely hurt in these strikes, I don't think you're going to have a lot of appetite, which is to say nothing, of course, of the counter strikes that are sure to come. I mean, you've already seen Gulf states be hit with Iran fire. Okay, what happens if you get a bunch of sort of lone disparate attacks in countries that are seen to be sympathetic to the U.S.-Israeli side of things, including in those two countries. So I don't know. Like, there just doesn't seem to be any real plan here in the long or medium term beyond just, putting out Pete Hegseth to be like, fuck yeah, war.
I would also suggest that there's one factor. I mean, there's several, but there's one factor in particular that could change how Americans feel about all this. And White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt teed it up. It's been a long time since Americans, in particular, probably parents of 17 to 25-year-old Americans, have thought about a draft. But here's what she had to say over the weekend.
Mothers out there are worried that we're going to have a draft, that they're going to see their sons get in and daughters get involved in this. What do you want to say about the president's plans for troops on the ground? As we know, it's been largely an air campaign up until now.
It has been, and it will continue to be, and President Trump wisely does not remove options off of the table. I know a lot of politicians like to do that quickly, but the president, as commander-in-chief, wants to continue to assess the success of this military operation. It's not part of the current plan right now, but the president, again, wisely keeps his options on the table.
Your thoughts on how that could change where United States, the sort of members of the public, the average American, is out on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine in virtually any scenario where you've got a plurality of Americans that are cheering on a draft, right? Let alone to cheer on a draft or be okay with a draft when it pertains to a war that has started off as unpopular as this one. So I can imagine public opinion to plummet even further should that be considered any more seriously than the press secretary did just there. But if I had to guess, I'd guess that at some point this week, if not today, later, whenever she gives her next briefing, there's clearer language, going back on the notion of a draft. Because why would anybody want that hanging over their head if they didn't need it?
Yeah. JJ needs an app in our live chat powered by Park Power says we can chat on this all day, but basically a hegemonic entity is supporting another hegemonic entity to do hegemonic things. Is it Russia? Is it Israel? Is it China? Is it the United States? JJ says, yes, it is. So there you are. We'll invite comments on this to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We can get back into this as our conversation continues with Supriya Dwivedi, but other ground to cover as well. By the way, do I say a belated Happy International Women's Day? I don't know. Do you even say happy ahead of it? My feed on social media was a mix of like, you go, girl, you're crushing it. Happy International Women's Day. And then the other half was people saying like, don't wish me a happy International Women's Day. I want to feel safe everywhere. Like, you know what I mean? Quit telling me I'm crushing it, I saw somebody say. Let's make the change that needs to be made. Where did you land on it?
I mean, I don't know. It just, if somebody wished me a happy International Women's Day, I'd go, thank you, I guess. But it's not like I gave myself a cake and streamers yesterday or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think it's nice to recognize the strong women in our lives, and wish and hope and work towards progress so that things get better. But yeah, there's no like happy IWD cupcakes that I was passing around or anything like that.
I mean,
Should I have a big banner? Mission accomplished. I did it.
Let me explain to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me explain how International Women's Day should roll out. We have these just these powerhouses in here on Friday. Wonderful friends of the show, Dr. Shazma Mathani, Jenny Adams are in here, and they're talking about it. And in the live chat, as often happens because of this incredible audience, someone was like, wasn't Edmonton and Calgary, weren't they like some of the worst cities in Canada to be a woman? And I'd remembered covering that like way back in terrestrial radio days, that some polling was out that reflected it was like kind of a tough look for Alberta in particular. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and we had been looking at some 2014 numbers. Turns out they've updated it since then, as we're about to find out. But there's a number of rankings, and we'll talk to their senior researcher in just a second, Katherine Scott. But on basically on a number of different metrics. Edmonton and now Barrie, Ontario, we saw in some of these rankings as well, had been ranked as the worst major urban center in Canada to live if you're a woman. Montreal performed very poorly in the rankings as well. Calgary was 21st nationally as well. And then among the top, Kingston, St. John's, Victoria, Hamilton, Vancouver, all the top 5. Is this something that you think, like across the country, I can't say that I would think that members of the public would have that on their radar, that the experience of half of the population could be so drastically different based on the city or the province that you're living in.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that either. So
Yeah.
I can certainly see how something like this would be flying under the radar. Can I just say something, though, is that whenever we do these like happiness metrics or anything like that, people in Victoria and Vancouver are always going to be happier than the rest of Canada, okay? Their weather is better. They've got the ocean right there. There's wildlife. Like, I don't know. So I don't think that's a fair comparison.
Yeah, I mean, I just always try to remind people, and especially here in Alberta, this carries a lot of weight because, Alberta's rat-free, right? You know this. You know this.
Yeah, I
And
do know
so-
this. I still find that wild, by the way. It's like the only jurisdiction in
And
like
it's
the
actually-
world that's managed to do it.
And it's actually, for the most part, true.
Yeah.
But, I always say to people, everyone says, Vancouver's so incredible, Vancouver. And I say, yeah, have you ever been down to Granville Island at night, man? You ever been down to Granville Island? It's like just a rat paradise down there. They're all over the place. I do what I can to try to elevate Alberta's standing on the national stage. Regardless, we're going to get into this and get some updated numbers. This is all prompted by Real Talkers in our live chat. Obviously, we're hanging out with Supriya Dwivedi in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. Before we go any further, Real Talkers, I want you to check out fullhouse.ca, or you can go directly to the Real Talk specific link in the show notes on podcast, on YouTube, and in our live chat. The Full House Lottery, of course, in support of the Royal Alexandra and University Hospital Foundations. Well, I'm going to encourage you to make sure that you get your tickets before midnight on March 11th. That's Wednesday of this week. That's the bonus deadline, and that's how you can qualify for this $125,000 bonus prize. That's just one of the offerings in this incredible opportunity to win big and change lives. And the earlier that you order, the more you're going to win with the Full House Lottery. Now, keep in mind, this bonus deadline coming up midnight on March 11th, you could win that $125,000 Go Auto voucher toward the vehicle of your dreams, plus that $1,000. It's called the Dadco voucher. Your little passenger, your little guy or gal can cruise in their own little battery-powered equivalent of whatever you're driving. I love this. Or you can just take $100,000 cash. You buy early, you have more chances to win big, and of course, you'll always qualify for the 4 grand prizes this year, including that legacy signature dream home valued at $2.5 million and more. The 50-50, the dream salary for a year, that's $2,000 a week for 52 weeks. I mean, a ton of reasons to get involved and to support Full House Lottery. You can follow the link in our live chat, follow the link in the show notes, or go directly to fullhouse.ca. Our friends at Friesen Brothers reminding you the Big Pig sale is on through till March 12th. That'll be Thursday of this week. You can order a 100-pound side of Alberta pork for just $2.99 a pound. That includes a mix of tenderloin and chops, belly and ribs, roasts and hocks, ground pork, and heritage pork soup bones. Ham and pea soup, anybody? Pick up your order starting March 27th. You can learn more by visiting friesen.com/bigpigsale. Athabasca University is Canada's open university. For those of you that are absolutely set on pursuing your post-secondary dream this year, you don't have to wait till September to make it happen. And you definitely didn't miss the boat if you didn't get it going in January. Athabasca University accepts registrations and kicks off studies all year round. That's what gives it that AU advantage. With world-class accredited online degrees and courses, AU is designed to fit your life for ambitious people across Canada and beyond. Athabasca University offers flexible approaches to higher education. Learn more about the AU Advantage. Browse their hundreds of programs and courses today by checking out athabascau.ca. And before we get to the numbers across Canada, we're going to take a look at numbers with North Road Investment Council. Just a couple of weeks ago, Carrie Williams joined us on the show to talk about how AI is disrupting markets and changing many folks' investment strategies. Successful saving creates unexpected challenges, and that's where the financial advisors at North Road Investment Council come in. They partner with discerning families, foundations, and associations across Alberta and beyond with expert navigation through the complexities of wealth accumulation and investment advisory services. Whether or not you bring your whole portfolio over to North Road, there's nothing to lose by getting a second set of eyes on your strategy. You can always book a consultation. They'll bill you hourly in this case and offer a discounted rate if you mention Real Talk. We're proud to partner with North Road Investment Council. Find them online today at northroadic.com. All right, well, let's get to the numbers. Again, a big shout out to Real Talkers in our live chat who kickstarted this conversation in our most recent episode. When it comes to major urban centers, if you're a woman in Canada, where's the best place to live and where's the worst? And of course, why? Katherine Scott joins us as senior researcher and director at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Katherine, you're on with Supriya Dwivedi and myself. Welcome to the show. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Supriya.
When you're taking a look at the best or the worst major Canadian municipality, and I can already tell by your body language you don't love my framing, so I promise to hand over the conch right away.
Best and the worst, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Best and the worst, black and white.
Right.
What are the sort of metrics that we're looking at? How do you even begin asking questions about this? What factors are you looking at?
I'm looking at a range of factors. Actually, folks have been trying to assess, track progress in gender equality for a long time, decades now. Lots of different international groups, folks here in Canada. Some agreement on things to be looking at, including, level of health and well-being, education, economic standing in the labor market. That's a really key one. With respect to women, of course, gender-based violence, really important. And the other area we look at is leadership, certainly in municipalities and, at all levels of government and in management and so forth, and, in business and private sector too.
So I'll echo Ryan's question here, just because I think it's fascinating. And once you look at the actual, metrics and the numbers, the gap or the perceived gap, when you say this is the best place in Canada for a woman and this is the worst place in Canada for a woman, you assume there to be like huge divergence in terms of like the day-to-day quality of life. But what does that gap actually look like?
Well, the last time we did a study, and actually a number of years ago, was in 2019. I did a study of 26 of the largest Canadian urban centers, and the gap between the top and the bottom actually was comparatively, so like 7 percentage points, comparatively small in that kind of, kind of an index where all the indicators are weighted equally. What you tend to find is that the total, the aggregate, the gap isn't particularly large, but there's lots of variation between different cities on different measures. So some of it gets washed out, but there are pretty significant challenges in some cities and strengths in others, and as you'd expect in a country as diverse as Canada.
Katherine, we were looking at numbers initially from 2014, which maybe not technically like a generation ago, but we've got a decade at least, right? Pretty long time ago. I know your team has done this again in 2019, and I believe again since. Can you talk to us about what you may have seen change or evolve? I mean, has it gotten any better in any of the cities? Has it gotten any worse in some of them?
Yeah, we haven't updated the city study, although your request actually made me think it's probably time to do that. In 2023, we looked at provinces, right, and compared where we're standing on provinces. And the key question then was, how had provinces done post-pandemic, right? Because that had been such a divisive and, harrowing experience for, Canadians across the country. So, in terms of what's changed, if you want to look back a decade or so, certainly, there's been change, I think, in the discussion around gender equality. You've seen certainly some improvement in leadership. That's up and down in terms of municipalities here we're talking about where you see the representation, women on council, that sort of thing. New mayors, like, back in the day, it was Valérie Laplante, who was in Montreal. Trying to remember the woman, of course, Calgary just recently had female mayors, I remember, right?
Yeah,
so
Jody Gondek, yeah.
You saw some progress there. Not so much progress on the management side. Third of managers, it's been pretty sticky indicator, remain women, that sort of thing. You saw the trends in the, economy play out. You saw an increase through the late teens in the number of women engaged in the labor market and wages getting pushed up. And then, of course, they got completely hammered in the pandemic, and that sort of indicator has fallen. The thing that has been most troubling, certainly, if you're going to look at a long-term trend, has been the increase in violence against women. We had that moment back in 2017, huge focus, the Me Too movement and so forth, which provoked, actually significant backlash. But, when the pandemic hit, you saw rates of intimate partner violence spike, since then, sexual assault. And it's been trending up, and that's been one of the most challenging and difficult sort of legacies of the pandemic in particular, was just the increased levels of violence against women that continue to impact women across the country.
Katherine, I wanted to touch on something you said there, which was like the backlash, right, of the Me Too movement, which I don't think anybody would argue against. The other thing that I find kind of worrying is in looking at data with respect to younger men, like Gen Z men or Gen Alpha men, they tend to have very retrograde views on gender compared to their, Gen X, millennial, even boomer counterparts.
Yeah.
Is that something that worries you? Because it seems like we're not doing something right.
No, 100%. And, I think, I take, this is a phenomenon people have noted actually in other countries as well. You see a bit of a split between young men and young women on in terms of what's important to them, I guess, is a way to frame that. A divide. I don't want to put it as, neatly as liberal versus,
Sure.
I'm not talking about big L or big, those sorts of things, but just more traditional gender-based views versus young women who have, are pushing forward with, lives in the, in career and family and so forth in the community. So I think there is a divide there and an economic tension. And that shift in the uncertainty about what's happening. And I think, when we talk about gender, we often talk about gender equality and what that means for women in particular, other gender diverse folks. But critically, the issue is, always about men too, and what's going on with them. And I think the tension there, I think the economic tension, I think as younger people are confronting a labor market that's really uncertain, a future that's uncertain, all sorts of pressures. We saw that in the mental health data coming out of the pandemic. So I think that divides a really important political dynamic right now, or social dynamic and economic dynamic right now that we have to take account of. It's a significant reality.
Catherine, your team, you and your team have put together, as you mentioned, in 2023, you kind of ranked the provinces. And I think it's interesting to get into. We can take a look at the numbers. In the context of what we're talking about, Nova Scotia fared very well as kind of the, when we're talking about the leadership metric and many of the other factors. British Columbia, number 2, New Brunswick, 3, Ontario, where Supriya is joining us from, 4. Where are you at this morning, Catherine?
We're in our national office in Ottawa.
In Ottawa, right on. Newfoundland, Labrador, 5, PEI 6, Alberta 7, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and then Manitoba coming in 10th in your rankings. But I thought that the framing of it was really interesting, and we'll put a link to this stat in the show notes so people can check it out for themselves. But the title page itself, Still in Recovery, assessing the pandemic's impact on women. That's kind of like an interesting angle of approach there, in particular talking about provinces. Can you take us into that?
Oh, for sure. We can all go back to 2020 and what that spring was. I mean, we're on the cusp, actually, obviously 6 years later, what that was like with the arrival of COVID and the shutdown of the economy, and literally millions of people thrown out of work or reduced hours. And, a large majority of whom, of course, were women because, largely represented in, front-facing service industries. Lost income. It was a moment of real crisis. Obviously businesses shuttered and so forth. That point, and like how we then thereafter for the next 2 years were struggling through recurrent waves of the pandemic. And so the question for this piece of research was, well, why don't we look at where, provincially, several indicators, like we looked at 17 indicators in this particular report, like where women were pre-pandemic and where they were in 2022. So, what could we find? And so that was a really important lens. And it was interesting to look at the province because, as you will remember, different provinces took different approaches. And I mean, I did a bigger piece looking at provincially, how did people respond to those particular challenges, whether the health, the economic challenges, the violence, as we've been talking about. And so this report you were pointing to talked, about, what did the data tell us about this? And recognizing the data, that changes what indicators you're choosing, and it doesn't. No indicator can speak to a person's real lived experience, but it was just kind of a snapshot of what was happening at that time. And you did see, what was really clear in the data, as I mentioned, this rise in violence and all of the indicators, whether that was intimate partner violence, sexual assault, criminal harassment was a really troubling finding. You saw as well, and we talked about it at the time, this huge rise in mental health challenges and people reporting poor mental health coming out of the pandemic, particularly young people, particularly young women. It was really notable and significant statistically. And this divide economically that was emerging, you saw, this massive recession in 2020, and then a fairly strong employment recovery where some folks were swept up in that recovery and were able to move up the income ladder, and a whole bunch of folks, whether they were in food and accommodation, got left behind. So that widening divide, and we're living with that legacy right now. And this report sort of documented that, and we talked a bit about what governments did and whether they were addressing those problems or not.
Catherine, considering, we are looking down the pipe at not a ton of rosy economic news, right? With CUSMA being potentially fully renegotiated, and who knows what'll come of that. We've got this, war in Iran. Who knows how long that's going to last. We've got the ongoing illegal invasion of Ukraine from Russia. I mean, it doesn't seem as though things are pointing in the right direction. Are you worried what some of this data will look like with continued economic sort of anxiety or precarity in the next, couple of years or so?
No, I think that's going to be a driving force in Canadian politics and, the well-being. I mean, obviously we've got those existential questions. One of the things I've been grappling with is, in this past year, in fact, the whole team at the research center is obviously the fallout of the ongoing trade war and the American economic assault on the Canadian economy, what that will be. Prime Minister Carney, of course, is, carving out a particular path, looking to, focusing on trying to diversify trade. building up Canada's sort of external connections. But we've been relatively silent on a lot of the sectors where women are working. So I have a lot of concerns about what the focus and attention. It's not necessarily a comprehensive approach. The inequality that we saw coming out of the pandemic, folks aren't really talking about that, only insofar as they're talking about the crisis, affordability crisis, which we can talk about. That obviously impacts low-income households in a particular way, and a lot of those are female, and where women are in that particular equation. But there has been a singular focus on a response to the current economic crisis that, in fact, is kind of hasn't. What's the way to frame this? We're not focusing on all the variables here. We're not focusing on all the sectors where people are working. We're not focusing on the gig works, the increase in precarity and the so forth. And, those are equally important, or investments in the care economy where millions and millions of Canadian women work who've seen pretty flat wages for the last 6 years, which are driving the gender wage gap, so those are we're not in the public policy eye right now, those types of questions, and that's a problem because of course they're big drivers of the economy, big drivers of economic well-being, which is what we're all talking about.
I want to jump into our live chat here, powered by Park Power. We're hanging out with Katherine Scott from the Canadian Centre of Policy for Policy Alternatives, Supriya Dwivedi, and myself here. Our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. Ms. KD says, I am sure that access to daycare has to be a metric here. Says women can't participate fully and be on the same career track without it. We've also got an interesting point from Tracy, who often comments. Tracy, I hope I appropriately describe your job. You're like a career counselor, right, Tracy? Is that you help people find meaningful employment? You help place people in the right fits, right? Tracy's been in touch with the show before. She says our firm has noticed that some young men are feeling left out, ultimately blaming young women who they perceive as having more opportunities. Kenzie's wondering, why are people surprised around violence or mental health issues as a result of the pandemic response? Les says it's more politically correct to help females. Men are expected to pull up their bootstraps. Scarlett says, all I know is that I'm more angry than I've ever been. She says maybe it's perimenopause. Maybe it's the horrors we're living with every day. Maybe it's the Epstein files and the lack of action, says Scarlett, but the anger is deep.
Oh, I think the anger is deep. I think the anger, certainly in the violence question among women, is deep. I think men are rightly, I think there's a lot of angst and uncertainty going around, and blaming women who tend to occupy lower wage jobs. What's one of the economic, it's interesting, like where folks work and opportunities are presented to them. One of the big issues, gender equality issues, has always been occupational segregation. Women tend to be channeled into different industries. So there's been attention, for instance, focused on how do you increase representation of not only women, but, Indigenous communities or folks from racialized communities and so forth in like science and technology fields, which have largely been male dominated in the past. Not made a huge progress on those sorts of things because, as I said, it tends to still be fairly separated. That's one of the challenges. But I do, coming back to the theme and what folks are talking about, I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And it speaks to our economy, the precarity of work, the growing precarity of work, folks wanting to basically go into the labor market, working their hearts out and wanting to earn a decent wage to support their families. All of that's really understandable. It's a fundamental issue. I don't think this is an issue about women taking opportunities from men. They really do tend to work in different sectors. And in fact, those sectors have not attracted much. They're not gaining, the wages are flat. Like, we've had this huge spike in inflation. It ate up all of the increases. But that's also true. That's not to say that the wages and they're flat for men too. I'm just saying a lot of uncertainty going around and it's really hitting people hard. I would argue that, making investments in community services, whether they be placement and employment supports, childcare, really critical. We could talk about that, which has been a new initiative, obviously dating the Trudeau National Childcare Plan back in 2021. That's up for renewal. It hasn't delivered everything, but it's not fully implemented. Like, it's really important to double down and make sure that all provinces, and Alberta included, it's been sitting on the fence there, roll out universal high quality childcare, which would be a huge boost to not only to women in their labor, but just to kids. Like it's such a huge, important thing for communities. Lots of things that we can be doing together to tackle this economic situation together rather than, hopefully not polarizing further, divide, seeding that divide, sowing more anger.
I'd be curious actually to ask a question of both of you. Katherine, maybe you first, but on what you just talked about, and I'm curious for Supriya's angle on this as well as a long, political strategist and also as a mom. But when you talk about this like universal childcare and that Trudeau initiative, Supriya would have been in the PMO at the time. And then you also mentioned, Katherine, rightfully so, the different approaches that provinces have taken to it. And we've seen it here in Alberta. It doesn't strike me as though everybody's kind of convinced or on board with the economic argument for it. But anytime I've heard the economic argument made, it's a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer.
So
good data on that, right?
Right?
There's good data. Yeah.
I don't know. Supriya, what do you think about it? Like I don't know. It just feels like it should almost be consensus, but maybe is it ideology in the way? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think to put the political sort of spin on it, I mean, I think anytime you have a capital L liberal propose something, you have to have a capital C conservative kind of reflexively oppose it as the way the system sort of goes, and to some degree vice versa. But I think to Katherine's point about the amount of data that we have on this, I actually think it's somewhat silly that we're still sort of like, whoa, what happens when we provide subsidized good childcare? Because we know what happens. Women get into the workforce. Their wages are generally tend to do a little bit better. And, kids because Katherine pointed that aspect as well, kids are better adjusted. They're better prepared for school. They're, fine. They may be coming home with a new virus every week for a little bit. But that's part of the game, you know what I mean? So I think it's actually quite demoralizing that even though, the National Child Care Program would have been proposed in 2021, as Katherine rightly pointed out, it's now 2026, and we still have a bunch of provinces that are either still on the fence or kind of half-assedly doing it because of some sort of ideological opposition to it.
There's just great information. You can look back to Quebec, who was first out the gate, and like what it meant there in terms of increasing rates of women's participation in the labor market, pushed up incomes, reduced child poverty. High quality childcare is a real boon, particularly for kids that don't have a lot of resources at home. We can look at it that way and should be organized. Why don't we see childcare the same way we look at education? We wouldn't be having this conversation if we were talking about kindergarten, right? Or grade one. Like, we provide these sorts of supports. Why is it such a heretical thing to think that, communities would have positioned high quality options for communities as they do in other countries, certainly over in Europe and so forth. So it's, we're at a point where we're not sure where the Carney's government's going. A lot of provincial pushbacks. Those programs are up for renewal this year. The other thing that's like, you would scratch your head and go like, what the whatever, is like where we are with pharmacare. Hey, why do people in British Columbia and Manitoba and Yukon, PEI, I think just signed, they have free access, like diabetes medication and free reproductive health, contraception. Like, again, part of a public health. And, again, the data out of BC, who was early out the bat on that, fantastic take-up, has been increased, more effective, and women are able to access more effective forms of birth control. They're not missing out on oral, again, good evidence. And, but, we're not crickets out of Ottawa and what's going on with the provinces, and huge pushback from some of the provinces and about no, they don't want to be supporting free birth control or, something different, or they don't want they're not keen to sign up. And it's whoa, the people in the provinces that have access to that program pretty keen on it, I can tell you. So anyway, that's
it almost feels, Katherine, we know our home province is the best, I guess, because the headlines stare us in the face and it's part of our daily reality. But it almost feels like Alberta's moving in the opposite direction. When you want to talk about access to birth control, Alberta's looking at making things more difficult on a number of fronts, including there.
Yeah, on the healthcare proposals and all the rest of it. Yeah, I can't speak for the dynamic in Alberta. I'm always perplexed. I mean, Alberta, certainly in the data that I've reported on and so forth. I mean, economic challenges, the gender wage gap's always been historically the largest in Alberta, just really high male wages, and women do national benchmark, but still lower levels of labor market participation, higher levels of part-time work, folks that could use community supports like childcare and the like to get a wiggle on and to, reinforce, families and incomes and so forth. But there's always been a very large gap in Alberta, and as compared to some of the other provinces. And, in a place like you talked about, Nova Scotia did well, and some of the Atlantic provinces. Now, they have much lower incomes, but the gap between men and women is smaller there. And you sort of, you can step back and look at that and think, well, is it about level of income? Is it about the gaps? And it's important to have a conversation about both because, equality, and we can define that in whatever it is, impact where people see themselves in the world and engaged and are able to fully contribute. Those are really important questions. So it's not just about the size of the pie. It really is how it's distributed and how people have the opportunity to participate, whether it's women, Indigenous people, and so forth. And it makes us all stronger. I mean, that's the thing about it. It's like childcare. It makes our community stronger, healthier, more, people. Canada's an extraordinary experiment. We can be doing so much better. And that's what sort of some of my work, that illustrates.
I love that. Canada, an extraordinary experiment. We can do so much better. Also, I would like to thank you for your gracious assessment of Alberta, describing it as just simply perplexing. We've heard nastier words invoked to describe our home province, Katherine. So I thought that was gracious. Mm-hmm. It's, great place to live. We got our warts and all too. Katherine Scott is a senior researcher, director at Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. You can check out her work. We'll link to it in our show notes, or you can go directly to policyalternatives.ca. Thanks so much, Katherine.
Hey, thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Supriya. Nice to chat.
We'll get to what Real Talkers have to say here on the live chat. Supriya's still going to hang out with us here, obviously. But and Tracy did follow up, by the way, and let us know what she does. Of course, she was the one saying that she sees younger men coming in all the time, feeling like younger women are being given more of those opportunities. She says our firm provides career and employment services and workforce development for employers. So kind of some interesting context there. Scarlett told us how pissed off she was, and she said, I don't know, she said it could be a number of things. There's a lot of things kind of bubbling up. And Supriya, as soon as we read the comment, people were just like, Sharon's like, I'm with you, Scarlett. Others are saying, I'm here. I feel the same way. There was a bunch of people, women in particular, feeling like, Cherie was another one of them, just saying that, what Scarlett said kind of resonated with them. I thought it was an important follow-up, important conversation to have on the heels of International Women's Day. Obviously, something we wanted to be talking about through the year. Was there anything that Katherine said that surprised you?
So the one thing that I found interesting is that, we were talking about childcare and childcare being this great metric that tends to perform positively with respect to, women's overall happiness. It shrinks the wage gap, et cetera. And this only actually occurred to me as you just said that, but I would have pushed a little bit on why Quebec then wasn't more towards the top of those provincial rankings, right? Because presumably if you've got that childcare system set up, that Quebec also tends to have a more generous paternity leave program than some other provinces. So, fathers tend to stay home a little bit longer with their kids right after birth. So it's interesting. But, to Scarlett's point, I mean, yeah, the girlies are pissed. Like, I think Scarlett's right on that. I mean, you see these headlines day in, day out. You see the pushback from the Me Too movement where all these, chuds are like, oh, I went too far. And then you see the Epstein files constantly sort of coming out. And you're like, well, what exactly went too far here when so many of these men that were engaging in illegal acts are essentially just running about their rich, merry old lives still. So I think there's quite a bit of anger to go around.
I had also never, I'm going to be honest, it makes me sound a little bit underinformed, but until you said Gen Alpha, I had never heard the phrase. I did not realize that Gen Z is not the youngest gen.
Yeah, it's Gen Alpha. Now
This
they
is the
make
thing.
fun of the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
And they both gang up to make fun of the millennials who then make fun of the Gen X. You know what I mean?
This
It's
is
just
this, and then we feel attacked, and then we
Yeah.
we take aim at boomers, and
Exactly.
the kind of that ripple effect. But I have been reading some. It's been intriguing. Just also, I guess, just like any parent would. I mean, I guess as a talk show host and a parent, you kind of do double duty when you're looking at statistics and trends and kind of sorting them out. But it was interesting. I saw just the other day. I think it was content leading up to International Women's Day, and they were saying that the youngest generation, the generation coming up of young adults, young boys, young men are, and you alluded to this earlier, more likely to adopt the sort of like old school mentality of like roles in the home and the man's role and the woman's role and that kind of thing. And it's such an interesting swing as compared to men and women that would be but 5 or 10 years older than them, you know?
Yeah, I my own kind of thesis on this is that I don't think it's solely an organic kind of shift. Like, I don't think all of a sudden a bunch of young Gen Alpha boys woke up and were like, fuck all these gains that women are making, and I hate this, and my mom needs to stay at home in the kitchen, and my dad's the one who goes to work. Like, I don't think that's what happened. I think realistically there is some sort of there will be some sort of an organic kind of backlash, if you will, to any one sort of group making equality gains. But I think there's the other aspect of this is that if you're a younger boy on a platform, whether that's YouTube or whether that's a social media platform, the platform will push you towards content that will kind of suck you into this misogyny kind of red pill rabbit hole. And I don't think it's a very good space for young boys to be in. Like, it's the pipeline of getting a very innocuous, Jordan Peterson video telling a young boy that he needs to make his bed in the morning, for example, or he needs to take responsibility in his household chores. To have that shift it goes quite quickly from an innocuous video to like a more insidious Andrew Tate type video, where, they're very misogynistic views are being explicitly kind of professed. And I think we need to talk about the impact that some of these algorithms and these platforms have on our kids.
Especially young boys. They should smarten up, because it's weird that they'll make their bed when Jordan Peterson tells them, and then their mom asks them and they tell them to fuck off.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tale as old as time, though, isn't it, Johnny?
It is a tale as old as time. Were you a guy that made, like, were you military corners on your bed?
No, but
bounce
I also
off your sheets?
Heck no, but I also didn't, yell at mom when she asked me to do it occasionally.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious to know where. I mean, the Andrew Tate thing is like, we had a lot of comments, and it's a fair one. There's a lot to it, but there was comments in our chat as Katherine was talking, as you were talking about it. People saying, never. At first, I got a little defensive. I thought they were talking about me. They said it's because these young people are being fed a bunch of horse shit by white male podcasters, and I couldn't help but feel somewhat attacked by that. But I mean, if you look at it, it's like the pervasiveness of that attitude. Like, Andrew Tate might be the worst offender, but he's far from the only one.
Yeah, I mean, this is the perfect, like, hashtag not all white male podcasters, right?
I'm going to hold off on posting that today. We hope you all enjoyed your Sunday. We hope everybody had a great International Women's Day. Back to defending white men.
With beards.
With beards.
And podcasts.
White men with beards and podcasts. Yeah. I think that's like the trifecta.
I feel like if there was a draft, we'd be the first ones they're coming for.
I've got bone spurs in my heel. Unfortunately,
we're ready to go.
I would love to go, but unfortunately, I'm ineligible. Hey, before we do go, one of the advantages, obviously, of talking to you every single week is you can give us the nitty gritty, give us the scoop on what's going down in the big smoke. And a Toronto mayoral election is seeing a familiar surname. And before you've provided us with a short clip. And so we'll hand you're the co-host every Monday here, so we'll hand the host reins over to you. You can throw to the clip as you see fit, but talk to us about Ford 3.0.
Yeah, it's gonna be something. So you had last week John Tory, who is the former mayor of Toronto, formally announced that he won't actually be seeking another go at the mayoral race. Folks that don't like live and breathe Toronto politics may not remember this, but John Tory had to resign, or he chose to resign after it became public that he was having an affair with a staffer in his office. According to more recent information from John Tory, he's still in a relationship with said former staffer, and has chosen not to move forward on this. And so now the big question is, okay, well, how does the mayoral race sort of shape up? And so you've got the incumbent Olivia Chow that is still leading by a little bit, but then you've got Councillor Brad Bradford, who's really eating at her, like nipping at her heels there, only now a few points behind her because this gap sort of opened up on the right side of the spectrum. But then you have Mikey Ford come along that kind of throws a wrench into all of this, having that very recognizable surname, as you pointed out, with Ford. He is Doug Ford and the late Rob Ford's nephew. He was a former minister in his uncle's government. And Ryan, you might remember this clip because we played it on Seriously back in the day.
R.I.P. Seriously, yeah.
Yeah, R.I.P. And this is the clip that I would like to call upon and how I think everyone should be aware of Michael Ford's presence in all politics, but particularly Toronto politics. Johnny, hit that clip.
As the Minister of Citizenship and Multiculturalism, I am proud that Ontario is home to over 900 people from India.
What?
So good.
This guy.
I love that clip so much for a bunch of reasons, but especially now. Like, I think I said this at the time, like 900 people, like you can find 900 Indians in a parking lot on any given Sunday at a Costco. Okay.
So glad you said that.
Yeah, we were just
not us.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I think.
By the way, not 900, Supriya, over 900.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Over 900.
Yes.
But I think, we're laughing. I'm laughing. I think it's a mistake for anyone to underestimate, a Ford, in particularly when it comes to municipal politics here in Toronto. So I'm actually quite interested to see how this kind of plays out, and what the race ends up looking like, because it could certainly be interesting with a Michael Ford in the race.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, no kidding. What would you say is like the ballot box question in Toronto?
Yeah, I don't know if there is necessarily a singular ballot box question, but I think for a lot of folks that I'm speaking to, it's like, how do we make things better? I think it's like kind of recognize that the status quo hasn't really been working. There is a sense that our transit isn't really working as well as it should, or as well as it could. There's a sense that, there's an increase in antisocial behavior, and as well as there's this perception of crime being quite bad, even if that might not bear out in the statistics. People certainly are feeling that. So I think that the question is, well, how do we move forward? How to make things better? But certainly as the race goes on, we'll have. I'll be providing more detailed updates for you and your audience. Right?
Love that. Leading up to the big day on October 26th, our check-ins with you, our hangouts with you in October are going to be bonkers.
Oh, yeah.
Toronto mayoral race, referendum in Alberta, and who knows, whatever the hell else will develop between now and then. We'll look forward to every single one of them. Thanks for doing this. We'll talk to you in a week.
Thanks, Ryan. Talk soon.
Yeah, you got it. That's Supriya Dwivedi joining us first episode of every week, presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. I just, this isn't like a good reason. It's just a reason. But I would love to see another Mayor Ford in Toronto just for the comedy. I mean, I know that's not, but like,
just another.
Toronto has gifted the nation several highly entertaining mayors.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably not been great if you lived in Toronto at that time.
No.
Like half of Canada does.
My family from being there too. But like, it's weird. Like, the whole Ford family machine is just intertwined, if you're from Ontario, into the whole culture. The whole time you've been growing up, from Rob to Doug.
Yeah.
And now Mike, it never ends.
Yeah.
We're all going to be long dead and gone when the last Ford is serving some time in his community, either as a politician or a mayor or a premier or whatever.
You remember Mel Lastman? I mean, he was, a wild interview from time to time. And, yeah, could the Fords prove to be Ontario's Kennedys?
No.
How about this from Erin? Erin, thanks for the love. She says, what a great guest. She's talking right as Katherine was signing up, says, I love the dynamic of Supriya and Ryan tag teaming interviews. I love that too, Aaron. We used to do it all the time on radio, so it's obviously something that we really enjoy here. A lot of you talking about the differences in generations and how they sort of see life differently. Goramu says nobody is making more fun of Gen X than Gen X.
That's true.
That from Goramu.
They are like a back and forth making fun. I do think though, when those kids grow up, like I know it seems bad right now, but we're gonna have some good old people around. I feel like us, we're almost. Let's be honest about how old we are. Not call
I'm getting
ourselves
pretty
out,
old.
but,
I'm getting up
But
there.
like when we're old, we're gonna be pretty we're pretty cool, right? Like we're pretty. No, but I'm saying like the majority of us are empathetic. The majority of us are relaxed and we're open to, even the conservative ones of us aren't really that bad. And now people are going to come.
Oh, someone's going to clip that.
But you know what I mean? Compared to you've got boomers now, God bless you all. Cause they're in my family, they're in everyone's, but you ruined the economy, the planet, and then
they just took advantage of opportunities.
And then they're sitting there now being like, when I was young, we used to be able to make fun of blind kids, and you know what I mean? It's like they're just saying the worst stuff.
Well,
and
there's this kind of understanding.
So cringe.
A lot of people talk about how the pendulums are swinging back. Have you heard that a lot? A lot of people will say, I often hear it in the context of people bringing up words, bringing words back from the dead. We were out this weekend and a friend invoked a word as part of a conversation, and everyone kind of went, ooh. And they were like, oh, no, you can use that word again. I was like, I'm not sure if you can. People go, well, the pendulum is swinging back.
Sure.
Is the pendulum swinging back with Gen Alpha? Had you even heard of Gen Alpha?
I have no idea. It's yeah, of course. They're the next ones. And then, Justin was just saying, there's betas being born right now. I
thought that was
what
a joke.
A Gen name to have,
no,
though.
That's a joke.
Yeah, I think Justin's
Gen Beta.
You know Justin.
No, I know,
yeah.
but it is Gen Beta.
Of course it is.
Born between 25 and 2039.
We could predict every
You want to be
Gen
called Gen Beta?
Well, what do you mean?
I just think right-wingers, and I'm talking about the scummy ones, not just political conservatives.
You do know it.
Lots of right-wingers.
It's not chosen. It just goes in alphabetical
order.
order.
I'm just saying. Well, no, they don't all. Obviously, it only started with Alpha. That was only the
A.
X. Yeah, but that's not alphabetical. Why? Anyway, the point is, but it's not alphabetical. I'm just saying millennials not, boomers not, but to be called a beta. Is there anything worse in the manosphere?
That's what I mean. It's going to be bad.
Especially if you're a beta cuck. Oh, my.
It seems to be going alphabetical now, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
What I was saying is I just feel I don't know. I think we're going to be okay because I feel like our generation, we're not going to be that bad of old people. And then maybe the kids coming up, when Supriya was talking today about how young minds are being shifted, I absolutely agree. It's either one of two things, how you're being raised by your parents, or if you're not getting enough attention, you're being raised by the internet, right? Which is also kind of how you're being raised by your parents. It's really, right? But today especially, it's a really scary corner of the internet where let's say you have a single parent and maybe it's not their fault. Maybe they work a lot. Maybe they don't have as much time for you. Now you're on a screen. And like I said, you go on certain sites, you get pulled in by these different reels and whatever. And then, maybe you're a young man who, doesn't have a lot of friends, finds it hard to talk to girls. And that hole just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And you keep falling, farther in it. So it's a scary time.
This feels like a good time to let Real Talkers know coming up this Friday. So 4 episodes from now, we're going to be welcoming Dr. Caroline Bazanko from Athabasca University. She's going to make the trip up to the capital city to join us here in our Real Talk studio in the historic Mercer Warehouse in downtown Edmonton. She's a registered psychologist that focuses on positive child and youth development, on emotional well-being, on resiliency. She develops training programs for parents, mental health professionals related to neurodivergence, anxiety, behavior management, learning difficulties. Really looking forward to what I think is going to be a fascinating and very important conversation. If what we're saying, I mean, if you're a parent or a grandparent, if you are a young adult right now, like, 18 to 25, and what we're talking about here is resonating with you. If you have a question for Caroline, for Dr. Bazanko, you can send it to us ahead of our March 13th episode. Just send it to talk@ryanjesperson.com, and we'll look forward to that one in partnership with Athabasca University. Nia makes a great point in our live chat, says, the loss of privilege can be uncomfortable, especially when society didn't prepare you. But she says, equality is necessary for a healthy society, which is obviously a great point across the board. Shyla, thanks for watching us, says, when Alberta cuts disability supports, everybody, the work doesn't disappear. It gets transferred onto families, mostly mothers. Says we become nurses and case managers and advocates and overnight staff. Absolutely. And Michael with a great suggestion says the best thing anybody can do, Johnny, touching on what you were discussing, anything to reduce the algorithm's influence on YouTube, says Michael, is to go into your settings and stop the next video. Says that's makes a huge difference by taking back some control.
Easier said than done, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
Especially, like, I'm just talking about younger people. Like when you're 18 or 16 or 20 and you got a phone, I mean, that addiction is stronger than nicotine. I'd say it's stronger than heroin. I mean, you like to be, not to look at things, but just to be a part of, even your friend group. Everyone's like, it used to be going out and conversating. Now it's like, are you tagged in the photo? You know what I mean? Are you in on the group chat? Are you, do you know where, are you up to date on the latest meme trend or whatever it is, right? Now I'm starting to sound old, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that is the way you feel involved in your friend group and community now to young people. So to tell them to, like, turn off their phone or not look, that's blasphemy.
Yeah, you notice these commercials that are running on in the hockey games now. They got all the athletes, like Canadian Olympic athletes, talking about taking breaks, talking about screen breaks or whatever. Connor McDavid saying he remembers playing out, road hockey. He goes, you're not going to make those memories if you're stuck on your screen all day.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, it's, they got to do that. It's public advocacy. They're probably required to do PSAs a certain amount of their program. But I think it's a good initiative. I think it's great. We were having a conversation in our household just this last weekend. We've not been a big gaming household, but our 10-year-old's curious and interested, and they've got like the Nintendo Switch or whatever they're using at his friends' houses.
Sure.
And he asked me what I played when I was a kid, and I said not much. And no hate on gamers. Obviously, that's a whole thing. It's a huge thing. Obviously, I mean, the gaming industry is bigger than Hollywood, but. I said to him, one kind of general principle that I know that my parents always had and that I've subscribed to as well is that it's cool to play. Like, is Madden still a thing? Madden's still got to be a thing, or like NHL or these games. If you're into the sports games,
of course,
as long as you're also playing the real sports. That was kind of something. I'm not saying everybody has to adopt that, but in our family, that was kind of something. You get outside, you can earn some screen time kind of idea.
I'm not saying everyone has to be an athlete or has to like. Or even try sports,
but
I do understand.
For you,
Yeah, I do agree that, like, kids need to go outside. I do like that, like, you're kind of adopting this idea, like, kids don't have a phone till a certain point. I think apps should absolutely ban anyone under 13 from being on. I think they should raise that age, honestly, because I feel like algorithms these days are sucking you in. They're trying to make you sad or argue. They're not positive. They're flooded with ads, all these things. But I think to a certain age, you're Connor McDavid, don't worry, buddy. I think kids are still, like, up until 12, 13, right? You're not really, I don't know. Most kids, you tell me, I don't have kids, don't have a phone, don't have a screen that isn't, monitored by their parents. They're still going outside. They're still ripping some mini sticks in the basement and ODRs and
mini sticks in the hotel hallways, man.
Oh, love it.
That is the absolute best. Many of you disagree with my desire to see another Ford involved in Ontario provincial. I'm not being serious.
You
guys.
just want the succession change. Like
it's purely. It's very selfish and it's not a serious. I'm just saying we would just have much more to, we would have more to work with here on the talk show. But many of you are pointing out, very seriously that, we need as many serious politicians as we possibly can. Meantime, Scarlett, who's just on fire today in our chat, she says, I'd way rather be a beta. All you alphas can do the work and I can have a glass of wine and have a nap. That actually sounds incredible as well.
That's genius.
Well, if it is going to be alphabetical, so the next one, Generation Gamma, that's kind of a cool one. Yeah. Gamma. Yeah. I'm picturing Dr. Evil saying it. Generation Gamma. Okay. We have, JJ says, as a Gen Xer, I'm still in recovery from the late 90s, from the bedazzled cowl, the multicolored tops, the super low-rise jeans, no pockets, rendering them
low-rise
useless.
jeans are back.
Says Owen, by the way, the pandemic, too. So there you go. Many of you with thoughts on the algorithm. I know that we're going to get into this one with Dr. Bazanko, which I'm really looking forward to. That's on the 13th of February. We have an amazing follow-up to a tough story. And so we're going to get to that in just a moment. This is a positive reflection submitted by Marie, who's been an amazing friend of the show. But before we do that, our friends at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce have a couple of things I want to make sure are on your radar. You can find everything at edmontonchamber.com. But if you're still kind of sifting through and sorting out what Alberta's budget means to you, to your business, to your household, and the like, I recommend at edmontonchamber.com their Budget in a Blink. This is an awesome resource, a budget breakdown ready to go, what matters, what changed, and what it all means for Edmonton's business community. It's the quickest way to see what this budget means for your business. And if you would like to be more involved, coming up on March 12th, midweek, Thursday of this week, tickets are still available, a few of them, for the Edmonton Chamber's Provincial Budget Luncheon with Alberta's Finance Minister, Nate Horner. This is your chance to hear directly from the Finance Minister, ask your own questions, and of course, rub shoulders with business leaders and decision makers from across the province. If you care about competitiveness, investment, or where this province is headed next, this is the room you want to be in. You can get your tickets for this March 12th event by visiting edmontonchamber.com. Our friends at UCAN Youth Services have a big week this week and into next, as well as comedy nights are officially back. You can go to ucan.ca, link directly to the comedy nights page at Rick Bronson's comic strip, March 9th to the 11th, then again the 16th to the 18th. These are nights of obviously a ton of laughs, a great time, incredible nights of comedy, all in support of a wonderful cause that is UCAN Youth Services, helping young people out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. We're encouraging you to go ahead and pick up your tickets today. You can go directly to ucancomedy.com. What we love to do, I book a table for 10, I invite a bunch of friends, we have a bunch of laughs, and everybody feels good about where the funds are going. You can learn more, get your tickets today. Don't wait at ucancomedy.com. And of course, we also want to give a big shout out to our friends at the Royal Alexandra Hospital Foundation. This is a huge year for them as the Royal Alex marks 125 years of transformative healthcare. Donors have always made the difference at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. I know a lot of you would have been considering or making donations around International Women's Day, in particular toward the Lois Hole Women's Hospital. We were talking to you through Heart Month in February about the C.K. Huey Heart Center. This truly is one of the most important health centers, one of the most important hospitals in the country. And you can help the Royal Alexandra Hospital get set and continue its innovative and remarkable care for another 125 years by considering a donation today at royalalex.org. Whether it's a tax return, maybe your family's doing estate planning, retirement planning, whatever the case may be, please do consider the Royal Alexandra Hospital Foundation when you're feeling generous at royalalex.org. Wanted to shout out Ken K, who let us know as he was watching our live stream today that he had to hit the road. He said, I'm going to switch over and listen to Mixlr, which is an awesome way to listen to Real Talk on the go. Our Real Talk live stream presented by California Closets. Just a reminder, across 7 different social media platforms. You can watch us live on LinkedIn when you're sitting at your desk first thing in the morning. Catch us on Facebook or wherever you find us. We wrap up our first episode of every week with a positive reflection, a silver lining, something that has filled our bucket, reminded us that humanity is all around us. And today's positive reflection is a tough context, but a beautiful sentiment. And this is submitted by Marie, who's a wonderful friend of the show. She sent this in to talk@ryanjesperson.com. She says, Ryan, I know that Real Talk is often looking for ways to give credit to people doing great things. And here's somebody that deserves all the credit in the world. She sent us this photo. She says, this is Mary Marguerite Guy, and I found out about her project through a person I follow on a YouTube crochet channel. Says Mary put out the word for people to crochet 12 by 12 inch granny squares that are all going to be stitched together to make blankets for every student or teacher that has been affected by that tragedy in Tumbler Ridge, BC. Marie says, I'm currently doing squares in their school colors. That's blue and gold, using yarn that I already had in my stash. She says, I've got 12 of them out of the way. Marie did 12 of them this weekend. She says those are going in the mail as we speak, and the project is open to yarn crafters across Canada. No specifications on the type of square or color. They just have to be 12 by 12 inches. She says Mary Marguerite Guy can be contacted through Facebook Messenger for people wanting to reach out to her. She says that's how I linked out with her. That's how I got her address. She says we have until April 30th to get the squares to her. Marie says she's working full-time while doing this. She says, I just wanted Real Talkers to be thinking about this project, and she says it would mean the world if you could give it support on your podcast. She says, thanks in advance. Keep doing what you do best. Say hi to Johnny, says Marie. She says, your friend down in southern Alberta, signing off there. Marie, we're so grateful that you and so many others are contributing your talents to send a message to our fellow Canadians in Tumbler Ridge, BC, who are still obviously reeling from that tragedy. We'll put the link into the show notes if you'd like to support this project launched by Mary Marguerite Guy. And Marie, thank you for passing along this positive reflection. We're never surprised to see Real Talkers taking steps, going above and beyond to make an impact in their own communities. Positive Reflections is proudly presented by our friends at Solar by Kuby. Don't forget, their spring installation schedule is filling fast. You can get a free solar quote anytime by visiting Kuby.ca. That's Kuby.ca. A busy week to come here on Real Talk. We appreciate you being part of it. Thanks for liking and subscribing to the show wherever you find it. And most importantly, thanks for telling your friends. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer John Hicks. General manager Katie Cook-Chivers. Account coordinator Lawrence Derlego. Human resources Lena Shepard. Website design Mike Johnston. Voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton.